I've seen a lot of people over the last few days making fun of the leftist women that have decided to protest Trump's latest addition to the Supreme Court by dressing up as characters from the television show The Handmaid's Tale, which, by the way, I've done an extensive video on, and I recommend you check that out if you haven't seen it yet. I'll put a link in the comments. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with the show, basically all you need to know is that it's about a fictional right-wing government who takes over the country and forces all of the women into institutionalized rape systems where they're essentially slaves to the men, and they're made to do housework for the ruling class, and they're ritualistically raped by the patriarchy until they bear their children. So basically the same thing as baby murder, possibly facing legal challenges that might go before the Supreme Court. This hyperbolic reaction we see from leftists, it happens over and over and over again. They don't compare what's happening in reality, that whatever it is they don't like, to something historical, something that's real, that might have happened before, rather than actually comparing it to something that has a parallel to what's happening now, to something historic that's happened, rather than saying, look, in the past when we've done X, Y has happened. Perhaps we shouldn't do this. Rather than doing that, you see them pointing instead to fiction. They instead will say, oh my God, this is exactly like this fictional thing that happened in this movie or in this TV show. Now, set aside for a moment that even when they're doing this, there is no parallel. It's not as if having a court that is conservative, that might not be in support of abortion, is anything even remotely close to the fictional tale of The Handmaid's Tale. Set aside that for a moment and just realize that the reason you see leftists doing this, the reason you see, and actually I would say even some people on the right would do this, is the same reason I have been saying for decades, that the right needs to focus on fiction, that the right needs to have their own fiction. Because increasingly what we're seeing in society, you have lots of people who don't actually experience real life. They experience everything vicariously. That's why it's so important, not just for fiction, to the right to actually present fiction, but also for the right to have at least some control over the media. And the left knows that. That's why there's so much censorship. They know that most people are living vicariously through their screens, whether it's because they're watching fiction or because they're watching the news. That's how they're experiencing the world more and more and more. Most people are not experiencing the world in the world. They're experiencing the world in their pods, and which is exactly the direction they want to go in, especially with the shutdown, of course, that's been amplified. And so when you control what the media is telling people, you control how they experience the world. And if you control fiction as well, you control their worldview, because that's how they're viewing the world, is through fiction and through the media, which, by the way, is basically fiction at this point. A good example of this is Twitch just shut down all the streams that were streaming the riots going on around the country. And that's because they knew that people were experiencing the world vicariously, through these streams. They were experiencing these riots. And that's not the worldview that the people that run Twitch, I guess Jeff Bezos is in charge or owns Twitch. That's not the worldview they want people to have. They don't want people experiencing the world through these streamers because it's giving you too much reality. They don't have time to edit it. They don't have time to editorialize it. All you're doing is you're looking through a window and seeing what's happening in real time on the street. So when CNN is telling you, oh no, it's mostly peaceful, it's not a big deal, it's easily disproven when you look through this window and you're living vicariously through the streamer and you're seeing in real time exactly what's happening. And they can't have that. They need to have a well-constructed, a well-thought-out version of reality that they can serve you up on a nice plate and you can lap it up and see the world the way they want you to see it and not the way that it is a perfect example of this, because the race riots that are happening in the country right now, that's not a new phenomenon, okay? This happens literally all the time. In fact, you want to see something that has a scary amount of parallels to what's happening today and really relates to what I'm talking about. Just take a look at the 1995 film Strange Days. This is a movie they created to address the riots that were going on in the 90s. This was the gussied up leftist version of reality that they presented. And it's actually really creepy how much it lines up with what's going on today, including the aspect, this living vicariously through video. Because that's a major element of the film. So let's just dive right into it. It's, like I said, it's amazing how many parallels there are. Strange Days begins by telling us that we're about 5 years into the future. So the movie was made in 1995, and it's almost the year 2000. We're in the last days of 1999. It's always interesting to see how optimistically the films from like the 1950s and 60s and even the 70s, with some notable exceptions, portrayed the future. But beginning in the 80s, especially in the 90s, nearly every depiction of the future was some sort of dystopia. All the optimism was totally gone, and the nihilism had taken over. And Strange Days is definitely not an exception. What's surprising, however, is how accurately James Cameron's vision of the future was in a lot of ways. It's ridiculous in some ways, but he nails it in a lot of ways. A new technology, for example, has been developed. This is how the movie opens up. It allows people to wear special hardware that records everything they're doing. What they see, what they taste, what they touch, what they feel. It's all recorded to a mini disc because, it's the 90s, that can be replayed by anyone. The data plays the sensory data directly to the brain of the person playing the disc, so that in many ways they're living the same exact experience that the person who originally recorded it did, because it was directly recording the sensory data coming from the brain. The technology has been banned by the government, but there exists a black market for the content, which is normally recordings of dangerous illegal situations, pornography, of course, torture, whatever people can't experience in their dull, boring lives. They can live vicariously through these recordings. So it's not much different than people watching streamers today. Obviously, it's augmented by all this other sensory data, but you're living vicariously through someone who's wearing a device able or capable of recording what they're doing. So we're introduced to this technology by watching one of these recordings. The recording is a robbery gone wrong. And our main character is jarred back to reality when he experiences the violent death of the man who was making the recording. This is Lenny. Lenny's a dealer in these recordings, and he buys from people like Tick, who pays criminals and prostitutes to wear the special hardware necessary to make the recordings before they do the sorts of things that people want to experience. Lenny buys the recording of the robbery gone wrong and then ventures into this dystopian version of Los Angeles. So, the 1999, the future 1999, which looks, kind of like Los Angeles today. People rioting, cops everywhere, cars on fire, and even a military presence. All things that accurately depict all the big cities in America today. On the radio, we hear even more accurate portrayals of America. A caller calls into a radio show and is complaining that gas is over $3 a gallon. It's atrocity. A number that must have sounded like an astronomical amount in 1995 when this movie was made, but in some parts of the country, that's kind of a bargain. The rioting and the looting also has a racial component to it. You see, there's a black supremacist group demanding reparations and condemning the police violence against blacks. It's led by a rapper named Jericho1, and the violence dramatically increases when he's found shot to death. Lenny's a junkie who gets high on his own supply. He's always watching these recordings he sells, but he's also obsessively watching recordings that he made himself of his ex-girlfriend Faith. Now, this movie came out way before, anyone had a camera in their pocket all the time, or before there was social media or even texting, before people could easily rewatch videos of their exes and reread all the old texts or stalk them on social media, unable to move on. But Lenny is a prediction of this technology and how it would be used and how it might stunt people's growth or their ability to move on. Lenny gets by watching these videos, by reliving these moments with his ex-girlfriend over and over and over again, and can't get past the breakup. So one morning after watching one of these videos, he gets up, he's getting ready for a night on the town. In the background, we hear some interesting news items coming from the TV, from the future. For example, Gaddafi has won the Nobel Peace Prize. And there's a one world government that has recently been formed with a world president. The idea that Earth would become a single nation is almost universal, if you think about it, in almost every Hollywood sci-fi, fiction about the future, no matter what decade it was produced. Almost as if globalism, it was just simply this unavoidable eventuality that would happen under any circumstances. It's inevitable. We're going to have a global government at some point. So Lenny goes out into the town and he begins selling these recordings to his clients, rich people who want to know what it's like to murder someone or to have sex with a supermodel or to be the supermodel that someone's having sex with. There's definitely a hint of transhumanism in the way it's portrayed, the way that Lenny sells these recordings. We don't have to be limited by our physical reality. Thanks to technology, we can all transcend and be whatever we want. The beauty of this new technology is it allows us to transcend beyond our physical bodies.
Maybe you want to be a girl.
And really defy what it was that God had intended for us, because we've risen above. We are now the new gods, thanks to this technology that we've created. So while Lenny's trying to close a deal with a new client, one of the hookers that gets paid to wear the recording equipment has been getting chased by the police, who seem to be going to great lengths to try to kill her, to execute her, not just arrest her, to just straight up kill her. She's been desperately trying to get a hold of Lenny for some reason and drops a recording that she has into Lenny's car. But the whole time she looks really nervous and freaked out, like, the cops are going to come and execute her at any moment. She comes into the bar while Lenny is talking to his friend Max, who just so happens to be an ex-cop, and now he's like a hired gun. She tells him that she's in trouble, but before she can explain, she sees some cops and she runs off. And while coincidentally at the same time, the car that she dropped the recording in gets towed away. So now Lenny needs to get a ride. So he calls up his very responsible entrepreneur, black single mom friend who drives her own limo for a living. She's morally superior to Lenny in every way, and scolds him and lectures him as she gives him a ride. She tells him that he's a junkie and he sells the junkies and he should get his act together and get on the straight and narrow like her. But Lenny is still obsessed with his ex-girlfriend Faith, and he can't give up watching these recordings. He goes to the club where she is with her new boyfriend, a powerful music producer who, in addition to managing her new career, coincidentally also used to manage the Jericho1 black supremacist guy. Lenny tells Faith that her friend, the hooker that the cops were chasing, said something about Faith possibly being in danger and that she seemed worried and he didn't know what was going on. Faith says that she doesn't care about her friend and that she's just, some hooker now. And before Lenny gets kicked out by Faith's new boyfriend's bodyguard, Lenny gets a mystery recording from one of his friends at the club. After Lenny gets kicked out of the club, we see outside the cops that were chasing Iris are now following him. While riding in his friend's limo, he decides to plug in and watch the mystery recording that his friend gave him at the club. He's horrified to see that it's a recording of someone raping and murdering Iris at a hotel. And one aspect of this rape and murder that makes it particularly disturbing and kind of taps into the dark side of the transhumanist possibilities of this futuristic technology that goes well beyond anything that could be accomplished through streaming video that we have today, is that the killer plugs his victim into his own brain as he rapes and murders her. So in other words, as she's being raped and murdered, she's experiencing what her killer is experiencing as he does it. This concept, if you take a moment and really think about it, it's obviously very evil, and it's way more nefarious than the film was able to really portray, I think, to the audience. So the scene doesn't really, it's not as traumatic as I think they were going for. And while this technology is well beyond, like I said, anything available today, is it really that much different than people who were victimized on video that end up, these videos that end up going viral? Videos that they're forced to watch again and again and again, reliving trauma often through the eyes of their victimizers over and over and over again. This is something that never existed in history before. If someone beat the hell out of you at school, you had that embarrassment of, the shame of that moment, of everyone, watching and seeing it. But you didn't have to watch a video of it happening over and over and over again. Now, because Lenny had just seen Iris not that long ago, he knows this has to be a fairly recent recording. So he races to the hotel where she's being attacked and discovers that he's too late, that she has indeed been murdered. Not knowing what to do, he goes and shows the recording to his friend Max, and also goes to tell Faith, his ex-girlfriend, that her friend has been murdered. At this point, Faith's new boyfriend has had enough, and he has him kicked out and taken out back. And Lenny has to be saved by the black single mom who beats up all of the bad guys without even wrinkling her suit. More race riots and protests, keep taking place as things heat up after the death of Jericho 1. Lenny goes to see Tick about the rape recording and finds out that Iris had gone to see Tick before she was murdered and made a copy of some recording that she had. But Tick doesn't know what's on the recording because she said that he couldn't watch it. All that he knew was it was a recording that Iris was trying to get to Lenny. And that's when Lenny has an epiphany and realizes she must have put the recording in his car that got repossessed. So Lenny and his friend break into the impound lot and get the disc, but before they can watch it, the evil cops that were chasing Iris around and have been following him around demand the recording. A few over-the-top, ridiculous action scenes later, and the black single mom has saved Lenny from the evil white cops. They then take refuge in the Black Ghetto, the only place that's really safe, and they watch the video that Iris was trying to give to Lenny. And this is where we see another big parallel to today. In the playback, they see that Iris was actually with the black activist Jericho 1, who apparently, despite all his rhetoric, was really into white women. We see that they get pulled over for no reason. They didn't do nothing. And the evil white cops, after pulling him over just to humiliate him and to dominate him because he's black, and the white cops, they just really hate black people for no reason. And even though Jericho 1 is following all of their instructions and doing everything that they said, and not resisting arrest or anything, because he's clever and saying things that upsets them. The low impulse control of the white cops causes them to freak out and just execute Jericho 1 in cold blood, along with all the people that were with him. Except for Iris, of course, who, because she was wired up with this equipment, has recorded the entire thing. So she essentially has this universe's version of the George Floyd video. If the black community were to see this video, the already anti-cop sentiment and the tension, the racial tension that's rising, would explode into all-out war. And that's why the evil white cops, the racist cops that killed Jericho 1 because he made them feel intellectually inferior, they need to try so hard to get this video. Because if this video gets out, they know that the black community is going to just lose it. So now that Lenny and the black single mom have watched this video, they decide the people need to see this video, but maybe tonight's not the best night. It's New Year's Eve. There's already riots going on. And so they need to think of a way to do this that's not going to, set something bigger off. They know that if they just release the video, that the riots will go completely out of control. So they need to think for a minute, and they decide to go see Tick to see if maybe there's any other copies of this video. And they find out that someone has fried his brain by messing with his equipment, and that he's now permanently like a vegetable. Lenny now gets worried that maybe Faith is in danger, and he decides once again to go see her at the club. And of course, once again, her new boyfriend freaks out, and after some drama, once again, of course, the black single mom saves the day and gets him out of there. The end of the movie gets pretty convoluted. In fact, there's a lot of fat that I've kind of been trimming in explaining this film, because a lot of it's pretty kind of, it's very melodramatic and at times, and kind of like a soap opera. It's likely the reason, really, that this movie isn't really seen as one of James Cameron's classics. All you really have to know is at the end, Faith and Max have all betrayed Lenny. They're all bad guys, but it gets worked out, and they're all out of the picture. Either they're dead, or a vegetable, or Lenny finally gets over Faith. I guess that's part of his arc. It's, like I said, though, it's a little cheesy. And at the end, also, the evil white cops find out where the black single mom is, and there's this big scene that's obviously supposed to be this loose composite of the Rodney King video from the 90s, where, you got the LAPD cops just beating up an innocent black woman, the black single mom that didn't do nothing, and the whole crowd is watching and just devastated by what they're seeing, but also, on the verge of kind of freaking out. But again, because it's kind of the laziest James Cameron movie maybe ever made, the police commissioner comes in and saves the day and demands that the crooked cops get arrested, because Lenny has shown him the video and he's disgusted by the racist white cops that would just, for no reason at all, kill Jericho 1. And but before they can be arrested, they try to kill the black single mom, and they end up getting killed in front of the crowd, and everyone claps. The end. Oh wait, no, not quite the end. Also, Lenny realizes that he really loves the black single mom, and they kiss, and everyone claps, and then it's the end. And that was the reality delivered to audiences in 1995. They all lived this experience in theaters or watching it at home. This was one of the lenses, the Hollywood lenses, they saw the race riots of the 90s through. This was the retelling of reality. This was the version of reality that was meant to resonate in people's minds. And I hope you realize that when they make the film about George Floyd, and they will, it's going to be just as realistic. For BlackPilled, I'm Devin Stack. If you like my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you share. If you want to support my work, you can do so at patreon.com/BlackPilled, subscribestar.com, grab a copy of my book, link is in the description, or send crypto to one of the addresses below.